A Japanese chef spent 13 years cooking for the most dangerous dictator in the world. When he finally escaped, what he revealed was so shocking that North Korea tried to hunt him down and silence him forever. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you're grateful you don't live under a dictatorship. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. His name is Kenji Fujimoto. Well, that's not his real name. He had to change it because the North Korean regime put a price on his head. For over a decade, this man was inside the inner circle of Kim Jong Il, one of the most secretive and brutal dictators in modern history. He cooked his meals, he traveled with him, he saw things that no outsider was ever supposed to see. And when he managed to escape North Korea in 2001, he did something that terrified the regime. He started talking. He wrote books, he gave interviews, he revealed the secrets of the Kim family, the lavish parties while people starved, the paranoia, the cruelty, the bizarre personal habits of a dictator who controlled every aspect of life for 25 million people. This is the story of Kenji Fujimoto. It's a story about survival, about courage, and about what really goes on behind the closed doors of one of the most mysterious countries on Earth. And I'm going to tell you everything: how he got hired, what he witnessed, how he escaped, and what happened when he did something absolutely insane and went back. This is the world that Kenji Fujimoto entered in 1988. And he didn't enter as a prisoner or a refugee. He entered as an employee. A chef hired to cook for Kim Jong Il himself. Let me set the scene for you because you need to understand just how crazy this whole situation is. North Korea is not a normal country. It's a totalitarian state where one family, the Kim family, has ruled with absolute power since 1948. First, Kim Il-sung, the grandfather, then Kim Jong-il, the father, and now Kim Jong-un, the grandson. These people aren't just political leaders, they're treated like gods. There are statues of them everywhere, portraits in every building. Children are taught to worship them from birth. The entire country is built around the cult of personality surrounding this one family, and the control is total. The government decides where you live, where you work, what you can read, what you can watch, what you can say. There's no free press, no internet access for regular people, no freedom of movement. You can't just leave North Korea. If you try, you'll be shot or sent to a labor camp. And the labor camps are horrific. Political prison camps where entire families are sent if one person is suspected of being disloyal. People are worked to death, starved, tortured. It's a system designed to keep everyone in line through absolute terror. This is the world that Kenji Fujimoto entered in 1988, and he didn't enter as a prisoner or a refugee. He entered as an employee, a chef hired to cook for Kim Jong-il himself. Now you might be wondering, how does a Japanese guy end up cooking for the North Korean dictator? Because Japan and North Korea aren't exactly friendly. In fact, they don't even have diplomatic relations. North Korea has kidnapped Japanese citizens. They've fired missiles over Japan. The two countries are hostile. But Kim Jong-il had a thing for Japanese food. He loved sushi, he was obsessed with it, and he wanted the best. So, through a network of contacts and intermediaries, he arranged to hire a Japanese sushi chef. That chef was Fujimoto. Actually, Fujimoto isn't even his real name. He's never revealed his real identity because even now, decades later, he's still afraid of North Korean retaliation. So we'll call him Fujimoto because that's the name he used in his books. In 1988, Fujimoto was working in Japan as a sushi chef. He was good at his job, really good. And somehow, through connections he's never fully explained, he was approached with an offer. Come to North Korea, cook for the leader, make a lot of money. Now, most people would say no, because going to North Korea sounds like a terrible idea. But Fujimoto said yes. Maybe it was the money, maybe it was the adventure. Maybe he didn't fully understand what he was getting into. Whatever the reason, he packed his bags and flew to Pyongyang. and his life changed forever. When Fujimoto first arrived in North Korea, he was shocked by what he saw, or more accurately, by what he didn't see. Pyongyang, the capital, looks impressive from a distance. There are wide boulevards, massive monuments, huge government buildings. But when you look closer, you realize it's all a facade. The buildings are empty. The streets are nearly deserted. There are barely any cars. The few people you see on the street look thin, malnourished, wearing the same drab clothing. Everything feels staged, like a movie set, and that's because it is staged. Pyongyang is a showcase city. Only the most loyal citizens are allowed to live there. Everyone else lives in the countryside, in poverty that most of the world can't even imagine. But Fujimoto wasn't being taken to see the poverty. He was being taken to see the wealth. Kim Jong Il's wealth. He was driven to one of Kim's residences, and when I say residence, I don't mean a house, I mean a palace. A massive compound with multiple buildings, gardens, swimming pools, movie theaters, everything you could possibly imagine. Kim Jong Il had dozens of these palaces scattered around the country, secret locations that most North Koreans didn't even know existed. Each one stocked with the finest imported goods, the best food, the best wine, the best everything. And Fujimoto's job was to help provide that lifestyle, to cook meals that would satisfy Kim Jong Il's expensive tastes. He was set up in a kitchen with access to ingredients that ordinary North Koreans could never dream of. Live lobster flown in from Japan, caviar from Russia, the finest cuts of beef, exotic fruits, imported alcohol. While millions of North Koreans were struggling to find enough food to survive, their leader was eating like an emperor, and Fujimoto was the one preparing those meals. At first, Fujimoto didn't interact much with Kim Jong Il directly. He was part of a team. There were other cooks. There were food tasters who would test everything before it was served to Kim, in case someone tried to poison him. There were security guards everywhere, servants, assistants. It was a massive operation. One of the most interesting things about Fujimoto's time with Kim Jong Il was the travel. Because Kim didn't just stay in North Korea, he traveled a lot, but in secret. Kim was afraid of flying, so he traveled by train. He had a special armored train with luxury cars, bedrooms, dining rooms, conference rooms, everything. And Fujimoto would go with him, along with dozens of other staff members, guards, assistants, entertainers. They'd all pile onto this train and travel to different locations. Sometimes they'd go to different parts of North Korea. Kim would visit his various palaces and residences. He'd inspect military facilities. He'd hold meetings with officials. But sometimes they'd leave North Korea entirely. They'd travel to China, to Russia. Kim would meet with foreign leaders, make deals, negotiate for aid and support. And Fujimoto was there for all of it, cooking meals, observing, taking mental notes of everything he saw. He traveled with Kim to Russia multiple times. He saw Kim meet with Russian officials. He saw the gifts that were exchanged, the agreements that were made. He traveled with Kim to China. He saw how the Chinese treated Kim with a mixture of respect and condescension. Because China needed North Korea as a buffer state, but they also found Kim Jong Il difficult and unpredictable. Fujimoto also traveled with Kim on trips within North Korea that were like royal tours. Kim would arrive at a location and everything would be perfectly staged. People would line the streets, waving and cheering, but it was all choreographed. The same people would be bussed from location to location to make it look like Kim was universally loved. And if anything went wrong, if someone didn't cheer enthusiastically enough, if someone looked unhappy, they'd be reported and punished later. It was all performance, all theater. And Fujimoto was backstage, seeing how the show was put together.
Fujimoto also got to know Kim Jong Il's family. And this is where things get even more interesting, because this is information that almost no one outside North Korea had access to. Kim Jong-il had multiple wives and mistresses. His personal life was complicated and secretive, but Fujimoto got to know some of these people. He met Kim's sons, including Kim Jong-un, who was just a child at the time, a chubby kid who loved basketball and video games. Fujimoto has described Kim Jong-un as spoiled and temperamental. Even as a child, he had an arrogant streak. He was treated like royalty because that's what he was, the grandson of Kim Il-sung, the son of Kim Jong-il, a prince in a totalitarian monarchy. Fujimoto would sometimes play basketball with the young Kim Jong-un. He'd let him win, obviously, because you don't beat the dictator's son at basketball and expect good things to happen. He also met Kim Jong-il's daughter, Kim Yo-jong, who is now one of the most powerful people in North Korea. She was a little girl back then, shy, quiet, but already being groomed for a role in the regime. And Fujimoto met Ko Yong-hui, one of Kim Jong-il's wives and the mother of Kim Jong-un. She was a former dancer, beautiful, but also calculating and ambitious. She was pushing for her son, Kim Jong-un, to be chosen as Kim Jong-il's successor. This was a big deal because Kim Jong-il had multiple sons. There was Kim Jong-nam, the oldest son, Kim Jong-chul, the middle son, and Kim Jong-un, the youngest. Kim Jong-il hadn't publicly announced who would succeed him, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering, different factions supporting different sons, different family members trying to position themselves for power. Fujimoto saw all of this. He saw the politics, the scheming, the competition, and he knew that whoever ended up in power would have the ability to reward their supporters and destroy their enemies. This is important because it shows that North Korea isn't just a dictatorship, it's a family business. And like any family business, there are succession fights, there's drama, there are betrayals. And Fujimoto was right in the middle of it, watching it all unfold. For 13 years, Fujimoto lived this strange double life. He was a prisoner, in a sense, because he couldn't just leave North Korea whenever he wanted. But he was also privileged. He had access to luxuries. He was protected by his relationship with Kim Jong-il. But over time, something changed. Fujimoto started to feel trapped. He missed his family in Japan. He missed his old life. And he started to realize that he was never going to be allowed to leave. Kim Jong-il had made it clear that Fujimoto was his chef, his friend. And that meant he was expected to stay forever, to serve Kim for the rest of his life. The thought of spending the rest of his days in North Korea, cooking for a dictator while the country crumbled around him, became unbearable. So Fujimoto started planning his escape. Now, escaping from North Korea is incredibly difficult. The borders are heavily guarded. There are landmines, electric fences, guard towers, dogs, soldiers with orders to shoot on sight. And for someone like Fujimoto, who was part of Kim Jong-il's inner circle, escaping was even more dangerous. Because if he was caught, he wouldn't just be sent to a labor camp, he'd be executed, probably after being tortured for information. But he had one advantage. Kim Jong-il trusted him, and that trust gave him opportunities that other people didn't have. In 2001, Fujimoto told Kim Jong-il that he needed to go to Japan to visit his sick mother. This was a lie, but Kim believed him. Because after 13 years, Kim thought of Fujimoto as loyal, as a friend. So Kim gave him permission to leave, temporarily, with the understanding that he would come back. Kim even gave him money for the trip and a gift to bring to his mother, a bag of expensive matsutake mushrooms. Fujimoto flew to Japan, and the moment he landed, he knew he was never going back. He'd made it out. He was free. But he also knew that he'd just made himself a target. Because Kim Jong-il doesn't forgive betrayal.
and leaving North Korea. Breaking that trust was the ultimate betrayal.
When Kim Jong Il realized that Fujimoto wasn't coming back, he was furious. Absolutely furious. This wasn't just about losing a chef. This was personal. Kim had trusted Fujimoto, had treated him like family, and Fujimoto had lied to him and run away. There are reports that Kim sent agents to Japan to find Fujimoto, to bring him back, or to kill him. Either way, Fujimoto was in danger, so he went into hiding. He changed his name, changed his appearance, moved frequently, lived in fear that North Korean agents would find him. But Fujimoto also did something incredibly brave, something that most people in his situation wouldn't have the courage to do. He started talking. He gave interviews to journalists. He wrote books. I Was Kim Jong Il's Cook was published in 2003. It became a bestseller. People all over the world were fascinated by his story. In the book, Fujimoto revealed details about Kim Jong Il's life that no one outside the regime knew. The palaces, the parties, the paranoia, the family dynamics, the disconnect between Kim's luxury and the people's suffering. He described Kim's personality, his mood swings, his sense of humor, his cruelty, his intelligence, his loneliness. Because despite all the power and wealth, Kim Jong Il was lonely. He couldn't trust anyone. Everyone around him was either afraid of him or trying to use him. He had no real friends, no genuine relationships, except maybe with Fujimoto. And that's why Fujimoto's betrayal hurt him so much. The North Korean regime was terrified of what Fujimoto might reveal because he knew things, he'd seen things, things that could damage the carefully constructed image of the Kim family. North Korea's propaganda portrays the Kims as selfless leaders who dedicate their lives to serving the people, as wise and benevolent rulers who care deeply about their country. But Fujimoto's revelations showed the truth, that Kim Jong Il was a spoiled dictator who lived in obscene luxury while his people starved, that he was paranoid and petty, that he cared more about his own pleasure than the welfare of his country. This was dangerous information because if the North Korean people ever learned the truth about their leaders, the whole system could collapse. So, North Korea responded with propaganda of their own. They claimed Fujimoto was a liar, a traitor, a fabricator who was making up stories for money. But Fujimoto had evidence. He had photographs, documents, detailed knowledge that only someone who'd been there could have. And other defectors confirmed his stories. People who'd worked in the regime corroborated his accounts. His credibility held up. The books were translated into multiple languages. Fujimoto became famous, a symbol of someone who'd escaped North Korea and lived to tell the tale. But fame came with a price. He had to live with constant security concerns, always looking over his shoulder, never knowing if today would be the day that North Korean agents caught up with him. To really understand why Fujimoto's revelations were so dangerous to North Korea, you need to understand how the regime works. North Korea isn't just a dictatorship, it's a totalitarian state built on a foundation of lies. The entire country is told that they're living in a paradise, that they're better off than people in other countries, that the Kims are protecting them from evil foreign powers who want to destroy them. They're told that South Korea is a U.S. colony where people live in poverty and misery, that Japan is a nation of war criminals, that America is an imperialist aggressor waiting to invade. They're told that Kim Il-sung was a godlike figure who single-handedly defeated the Japanese and founded the nation, that Kim Jong-il was a genius who strengthened the country and protected it from its enemies. None of this is true, but most North Koreans don't know that because they have no access to outside information, no internet, no foreign news, no way to fact-check what they're being told. The few people who do learn the truth either keep quiet out of fear or they try to escape. And that's why defectors like Fujimoto are so important.
Because they can tell the world what's really happening. They can pierce the veil of secrecy that North Korea hides behind. Fujimoto's revelations weren't just gossip about a dictator's personal life. They were evidence of a massive system of oppression and deception. They showed that the Kim family doesn't care about the North Korean people, that they're willing to let millions starve while they live in luxury, that the entire ideology of the regime is a sham designed to maintain power. And once that truth is out there, it's hard to put it back. It spreads. People talk. And even in North Korea, where information is tightly controlled, whispers get through. That's why the regime was so desperate to discredit Fujimoto, to silence him, to make sure his story didn't undermine their control.
Fujimoto wasn't the only person to escape North Korea and reveal its secrets. Over the years, thousands of people have defected, and many of them have told similar stories. There's Shin Dong-hook, who was born in a political prison camp. He spent his entire childhood in the camp, subjected to torture, starvation, and forced labor. He eventually escaped and wrote about his experiences. There's Yeonmi Park, who escaped as a teenager with her mother. They fled across the border into China, where they were almost sold into sexual slavery. They eventually made it to South Korea and freedom. Yeonmi has become an outspoken critic of the North Korean regime. There's Kang Chol-hwan, who spent 10 years in a prison camp as a child because his grandfather was accused of being a traitor. He survived and escaped, and later wrote a book about his experiences. These stories all confirm what Fujimoto revealed, that North Korea is a brutal, oppressive state where human life is cheap and the rulers care only about maintaining their power. But Fujimoto's story is unique because he wasn't just a victim of the regime, he was an insider. He saw how the Kim family really lives. He saw the hypocrisy up close, and that makes his testimony especially powerful. Let's talk about the psychology of someone like Kim Jong Il, because understanding how dictators think helps explain why they do the things they do. Dictators aren't born evil. They're created by a combination of factors: upbringing, personality, circumstances, and the corrupting influence of absolute power. Kim Jong Il was raised to be a dictator. His father, Kim Il-sung, groomed him for power from a young age. He was told he was special, superior, destined to rule. He was given everything he wanted. He never faced consequences for his actions. He never had to work a normal job or struggle like ordinary people. And over time, that creates a warped sense of reality. You start to believe you really are special, that you deserve the luxury and the power, that other people exist to serve you. You also develop paranoia, because when you have absolute power, you know that other people want it, so you can't trust anyone. Everyone is a potential threat. And you dehumanize people. When you have the power of life and death over millions, it's hard to see them as individuals with their own hopes and dreams. They become numbers, statistics, tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. This is what happened to Kim Jong Il. He became a monster. Not because he was born that way, but because the system made him that way. And Fujimoto saw this transformation up close. He saw moments when Kim showed humanity, when he cried at movies, or laughed at jokes, or showed affection for his children. But he also saw moments when Kim was cold and cruel, when he ordered executions, when he ignored the suffering of his people, when he prioritized his own comfort over everything else. It's a reminder that even monsters are human, and that's what makes them so frightening, because it means that under the right circumstances, anyone could become like that. Kim Jong-il died in 2011. He was 69 years old. The official cause of death was a heart attack while on a train. When the news broke, there was mass mourning in North Korea. People wept in the streets. They beat their chests and wailed. It looked like genuine grief.
But was it? Or was it performance? Because in North Korea, you're expected to show loyalty, and not mourning loudly enough could be seen as disloyalty, which could lead to punishment. So it's hard to know how many people were genuinely sad and how many were just putting on a show to protect themselves. What we do know is that Kim Jong Il left behind a country in ruins, an economy that barely functioned, a population that was malnourished and oppressed, a military that was large but outdated, and he left behind a succession plan. His youngest son, Kim Jong-un, would take over. This was the same Kim Jong-un that Fujimoto had met as a child, the chubby kid who loved basketball, who was spoiled and arrogant. Now he was the supreme leader of North Korea, one of the youngest dictators in the world, and he had big shoes to fill. The question everyone was asking was, what kind of leader would he be? Would he reform the country, open it up to the world, or would he continue his father's brutal policies? The answer, as we now know, is that he continued them, and in some ways made them worse.
Fujimoto wasn't the only person to escape North Korea and reveal its secrets. Over the years, thousands of people have defected, and many of them have told similar stories. There's Shin Dong-hyuk, who was born in a political prison camp. He spent his entire childhood in the camp, subjected to torture, starvation, and forced labor. He eventually escaped and wrote about his experiences. There's Yeonmi Park, who escaped as a teenager with her mother. They fled across the border into China, where they were almost sold into sexual slavery. They eventually made it to South Korea and freedom. Yeonmi has become an outspoken critic of the North Korean regime. There's Kang Chol-hwan, who spent 10 years in a prison camp as a child because his grandfather was accused of being a traitor. He survived and escaped, and later wrote a book about his experiences. These stories all confirm what Fujimoto revealed, that North Korea is a brutal, oppressive state where human life is cheap and the rulers care only about maintaining their power. But Fujimoto's story is unique because he wasn't just a victim of the regime. He was an insider. He saw how the Kim family really lives. He saw the hypocrisy up close. And that makes his testimony especially powerful. Let's talk about the psychology of someone like Kim Jong Il, because understanding how dictators think helps explain why they do the things they do. Dictators aren't born evil. They're created by a combination of factors: upbringing, personality, circumstances, and the corrupting influence of absolute power. Kim Jong Il was raised to be a dictator. His father, Kim Il-sung, groomed him for power from a young age. He was told he was special, superior, destined to rule. He was given everything he wanted. He never faced consequences for his actions. He never had to work a normal job or struggle like ordinary people. And over time, that creates a warped sense of reality. You start to believe you really are special, that you deserve the luxury and the power, that other people exist to serve you. You also develop paranoia, because when you have absolute power, you know that other people want it, so you can't trust anyone. Everyone is a potential threat. Kim Jong-un has executed more people than his father did, including family members who he saw as threats. He's expanded the nuclear weapons program. He's tightened control over the population. But he's also tried to modernize his image. He's appeared in public more than his father did. He's posed for photos with K-pop stars and sports figures. He's tried to present himself as a young, modern leader. But beneath the surface, nothing has really changed. North Korea is still a totalitarian state, still oppressive, still impoverished, still dangerous. And Fujimoto, watching from Japan, knew exactly what to expect, because he'd seen the family dynamics. He'd seen how Kim Jong-un was raised. He knew the kind of person he was. Now here's where the story takes an absolutely insane turn. Are you ready for this? In 2012, a year after Kim Jong Il's death, Fujimoto did something that no one expected. He went back to North Korea. I know, it sounds crazy. It sounds like suicide. This is a man who'd been in hiding for over a decade, who'd written books exposing the regime's secrets, who was probably on North Korea's most wanted list, and he decided to go back. Why? Why would anyone do that? According to Fujimoto, he was invited. Kim Jong-un, the new leader, reached out to him through intermediaries. He said he wanted to see Fujimoto again, that he held no grudges, that he understood why Fujimoto had left, and that all was forgiven. Now, most people would assume this was a trap, a way to lure Fujimoto back so they could arrest him or kill him. But Fujimoto believed it, or at least he wanted to believe it. Maybe he was homesick for the strange life he'd left behind. Maybe he missed the excitement. Maybe he felt guilty about betraying Kim Jong-il. Maybe he was just curious. Whatever the reason, he agreed to go. His friends thought he was insane. His family begged him not to do it. Security experts told him he'd never come back alive. But Fujimoto got on a plane and flew to North Korea. He was taken to Pyongyang, to one of Kim Jong-un's residences, and there he met the new leader face to face. Kim Jong-un greeted him warmly, like an old friend. He hugged him. They had dinner together. They talked about old times. Kim Jong-un told Fujimoto that he'd read his books, that he wasn't angry, that he understood Fujimoto had his own life to live. It was surreal. Here was a dictator who'd executed people for much less, sitting down for a friendly meal with someone who'd exposed his family's secrets to the world. But that's the thing about the Kim family. They're unpredictable, and they value loyalty and personal relationships in ways that don't always make rational sense. Kim Jong-un had fond memories of Fujimoto, the sushi, the basketball games, the time they'd spent together when he was a kid. And so, instead of punishing Fujimoto, he welcomed him back. Fujimoto stayed in North Korea for several weeks. He cooked for Kim Jong-un. He met with old colleagues. He saw how the country had changed under the new leader. And then, when the visit was over, he was allowed to leave. He flew back to Japan, alive and unharmed. It's one of the strangest stories to come out of North Korea. A defector who revealed state secrets, who was welcomed back by the regime, and who lived to tell about it. Since then, Fujimoto has made several more trips back to North Korea. He's maintained a relationship with Kim Jong-un. He's even been photographed with him at public events. It's a bizarre arrangement, but it shows something important about how North Korea works. Personal relationships matter. Loyalty matters. And if you're in the leader's good graces, the normal rules don't apply. Fujimoto's return trips to North Korea have given him new insights into how the country has changed under Kim Jong-un. And according to Fujimoto, not much has changed. The palaces are still there. The luxury is still there. Kim Jong-un lives the same kind of life his father did. Expensive cognac, imported food, all the comforts money can buy. Meanwhile, the people are still struggling. There's still food insecurity, still political repression, still prison camps. Kim Jong-un has made some token gestures toward modernization. He's built ski resorts and water parks. He's allowed some Western products into the country. He's tried to make Pyongyang look more modern and prosperous, but it's all window dressing. The fundamental problems haven't been addressed. And the nuclear weapons program has expanded dramatically. Kim Jong-un has conducted more nuclear tests than his father and grandfather combined. He's developed missiles that can potentially reach the United States. This has made North Korea more dangerous than ever, and it's made Kim Jong-un more confident. He knows that as long as he has nuclear weapons, the world has to take him seriously. Fujimoto has said in interviews that Kim Jong-un is more ruthless than his father, more willing to use violence to maintain power, less sentimental. When Kim Jong-un took power, there were hopes that he might reform the country, that his education in Switzerland, his exposure to Western culture, might make him more moderate. But those hopes were misplaced. Kim Jong-un has proven to be just as brutal as his predecessors, maybe more so. He's executed hundreds of officials who he saw as disloyal or incompetent, including his own uncle, Jang Song-thak, who was considered the second most powerful man in North Korea. Jang was arrested, tried, and executed. His entire family was killed too. His children, his grandchildren, everyone wiped out to eliminate any potential threat. This is the kind of regime that Fujimoto has been dealing with. And the fact that he's managed to maintain a relationship with Kim Jong Un without getting killed is remarkable. So what does Fujimoto's story tell us about North Korea? What can we learn from it? First, it shows us that the Kim regime is built on a foundation of hypocrisy. They claim to be serving the people, but they're really serving themselves. They live in luxury while their people suffer. Second, it shows us that personal relationships matter in North Korea more than ideology. Kim Jong-un welcomed Fujimoto back not because it made political sense, but because of their personal history. Third, it shows us that the regime is more fragile than it appears. They're terrified of defectors, terrified of information getting out, because they know that if the truth spreads, their control weakens. Fourth, it shows us that change in North Korea is unlikely to come from within the regime. The Kims are too entrenched, too powerful, too willing to use violence to maintain control. If change is going to come, it'll probably come from outside pressure, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or from internal collapse when the system simply can't sustain itself anymore. But that collapse could be catastrophic because North Korea has nuclear weapons, and a desperate regime with nothing to lose is incredibly dangerous. Fifth, it shows us the power of individual testimony. Fujimoto's story and the stories of other defectors have shaped how the world sees North Korea. They've pierced the secrecy, they've revealed the truth. And that truth is hard to ignore. Even North Korea's allies, like China and Russia, know what the regime really is. They support it for strategic reasons, not because they believe in its ideology. Let's talk about what life is like for North Korean defectors, because Fujimoto's experience is unusual, but it's part of a larger story. Thousands of North Koreans escape every year. Most of them cross into China illegally. From there, they try to make it to South Korea or other countries where they can claim asylum. But the journey is incredibly dangerous. The border with China is heavily guarded. If you're caught, you're sent back to North Korea. And if you're sent back, you face torture, imprisonment, or execution. Even if you make it into China, you're not safe, because China has an agreement with North Korea to send defectors back, so you have to hide, live in the shadows, avoid the police. Many defectors, especially women, are trafficked into forced marriages or sexual slavery in China. They're vulnerable, desperate, and there are people who exploit that. Those who make it to South Korea face a different set of challenges. They're free, but they're also strangers in a strange land. South Korea and North Korea speak the same language, but they've been separated for 70 years. The cultures have diverged. The technology is completely different. North Korean defectors often struggle to adapt. They have trouble finding jobs. They face discrimination from South Koreans who see them as backwards or suspicious. They also live with guilt because they left family members behind. And in North Korea, if you defect, your family gets punished. They're sent to labor camps. Their lives are destroyed. So defectors carry that burden, knowing that their freedom came at the cost of their family's suffering. Fujimoto was luckier than most defectors. He had skills. He spoke Japanese. He had a story that people wanted to hear. So he was able to make a living and build a life in Japan. But even he has talked about the psychological toll, the fear, the guilt, the constant awareness that he's a target. That's the reality for defectors. Freedom comes with a price. And that price is paid every single day. One of the things that makes North Korea so effective at maintaining control is its propaganda machine. It's one of the most sophisticated in the world. From birth, North Koreans are taught to worship the Kim family. They're taught that Kim Il-sung was a god who created the nation, that Kim Jong Il was a genius who protected it, that Kim Jong-un is a wise leader who will lead them to prosperity. They're taught that the outside world is dangerous and evil, that America wants to invade and destroy them,
that South Korea is a puppet state, that Japan is full of war criminals. They're taught that they're lucky to live in North Korea, that despite hardships, they're better off than people in other countries. This propaganda is reinforced constantly, through schools, through media, through public performances and displays, through mandatory political study sessions. And it works. Not on everyone, but on enough people to keep the system stable. Because when you're raised in an environment where everyone around you says the same thing, where questioning the official narrative is dangerous, where there's no alternative source of information, you tend to believe what you're told. That's why defectors like Fujimoto are so important. They break through that propaganda. They provide an alternative narrative. They show that the Kim family isn't divine, that they're just people, flawed, selfish people who've built a system to benefit themselves. And once that illusion is shattered, it can't be rebuilt. Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. That's what terrifies the regime. The idea that the truth might spread, that more people might start questioning, that the whole system might unravel. So they fight back with more propaganda, more censorship, more punishment for anyone who dares to think differently. It's a constant battle. Information versus control. Truth versus lies. And people like Fujimoto are on the front lines of that battle.
The international community has struggled with how to deal with North Korea because there are no good options. Economic sanctions have been in place for decades. They've hurt the North Korean economy, but they haven't changed the regime's behavior. In fact, in some ways, they've made things worse for ordinary people while the elites continue to live well. Military action is off the table because North Korea has nuclear weapons, and because any war on the Korean peninsula would be catastrophic. Seoul is too close to the border. Millions of people would die in the first few days. Diplomacy has been tried repeatedly. Talks, summits, agreements. But North Korea always violates the agreements. They promise to denuclearize, then continue developing weapons. They promise reforms, then crack down harder. The truth is, there's no easy solution. North Korea is a problem that the world has been trying to solve for 70 years, and we're no closer to a solution now than we were then. Some people argue for engagement, build relationships, provide aid, gradually integrate North Korea into the global community, hope that exposure to the outside world will lead to internal change. Others argue for maximum pressure, tighten sanctions, isolate the regime, make it so painful that they have no choice but to change. Both approaches have been tried. Neither has worked. And in the meantime, the North Korean people continue to suffer. 25 million people living under one of the most oppressive regimes in history. Fujimoto's story reminds us that behind the politics and the strategy, there are real people involved. People who are just trying to survive. People who deserve better than the system they were born into. So that's the story of Kenji Fujimoto, a Japanese sushi chef who spent 13 years in the inner circle of Kim Jong Il, who saw things that no outsider was supposed to see, who escaped and told the world what he'd witnessed, and who, incredibly, went back and lived to tell about it. His story is fascinating because it gives us a window into one of the most secretive regimes on Earth. It shows us the reality behind the propaganda, the luxury amid the poverty, the paranoia and the brutality, the strange contradictions of a system that's both incredibly powerful and incredibly fragile. But it's also a story about human nature, about how power corrupts, about how systems of oppression are maintained, about the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Fujimoto could have stayed silent. After he escaped, he could have just lived quietly and tried to forget about his time in North Korea. That would have been the safe thing to do. But he chose to speak out, to write his books, to tell his story, even though it put him in danger, even though the North Korean regime wanted him silenced. Why did he do it? Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of a sense of responsibility, Maybe because he felt like the world needed to know. Whatever his reasons, we are better off for it. Because stories like his help us understand North Korea. They help us see past the propaganda and the secrecy. They remind us that even in the darkest places, there are people with stories worth hearing. Kim Jong Il is dead now, but his legacy lives on. In the system he maintained, in the son who succeeded him, in the millions of people who still live under Kim family rule. And Fujimoto is still alive, still telling his story, still one of the few people who can say he knew Kim Jong Il personally, who can describe what it was really like inside the Hermit Kingdom. His story also raises uncomfortable questions about complicity, about what we'd do in his situation. Because for 13 years, Fujimoto was part of the system. He cooked for a dictator. He enjoyed privileges while people starved. He's acknowledged this. He said he feels guilty about it, that he wishes he'd left sooner, that he wishes he'd done something to help the North Korean people. But he also points out that he was trapped, that leaving wasn't easy, that speaking out was dangerous. And that's true. It's easy to judge from the outside. But when you're in that situation, when your life is on the line, the calculations are different. What we can say is that Fujimoto eventually did the right thing. He got out. He told the truth. And in doing so, he contributed to our understanding of one of the world's most dangerous regimes. His relationship with Kim Jong Un is still strange and puzzling. The fact that he's been able to maintain contact with the regime, to visit North Korea multiple times, is almost unprecedented for a defector. Some people think he's being used, that North Korea is using him for propaganda purposes, to show that defectors can come back and be forgiven. Others think it's genuine, that Kim Jong Un really does have affection for him, that in a world where the dictator can trust almost no one, Fujimoto represents a connection to happier, simpler times. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Relationships in North Korea are complicated. They're transactional, but they can also be personal. What's clear is that Fujimoto's story isn't over. He's still alive, still telling his story, still making trips to North Korea. And as long as the Kim regime exists, his testimony will remain relevant, because it reminds us of what that regime really is. Not the propaganda version, not the version they want the world to see, but the real version, the version that exists behind closed doors. Version where leaders live like emperors while their people starve, where human life is cheap and loyalty is everything, where the truth is whatever the regime says it is. That's the North Korea that Kenji Fujimoto knows, and that's the North Korea he spent the last 2 decades telling the world about. His story is a testament to the power of truth, to the importance of bearing witness, to the courage it takes to speak out against tyranny. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest places, even in systems designed to crush the human spirit, there are always people who resist, who survive, who tell their stories. Kenji Fujimoto is one of those people, and his story deserves to be heard. Hit subscribe to see more untold stories that governments don't want you to know about.